Welcome to the Chemical Burrito YouTube channel. Let's take a look at the Anbernic WIN600. Yes, they did make a PC handheld. So, is the Anbernic WIN600 worth considering in 2024? It's been out for a little while now. Let's take a look. First, little specifications. The Anbernic WIN600 is powered by an Athlon 3050E CPU with Radeon Vega 3 graphics. This is not a terribly impressive handheld when you compare to the likes of the Steam Deck and the Asus, ROG Ally. Both of those are much more powerful, but maybe they're more expensive too. So maybe we can give the Anbernic a pass here, depending on how it performs. You get 16 gigabytes of RAM with the blue model that I have. And it also comes with, and this is actually pretty nice, a 1 terabyte SSD as your internal storage. And the current price on Anbernic's website is $349 new. So let's take a look and see how well this handheld is going to do with some gaming. So, to start off, let's take a look at Persona 4. I don't have the sound running through the capture card because Windows can be a little finicky about that. And besides, we want to talk while we're taking a look at the game. So we have Persona 5 Royal here, and this is running from Steam, so it's the Windows version. So to get this to run at an acceptable frame rate, which actually we can play it pretty well here. Thankfully, it's also a turn-based game rather than fully action-based. But what we ended up needing to do here is turn the graphics settings down. So you turn it down to these settings that I have on the screen here, and you can get a pretty consistent 30 frames per second. So let's take a look at how it's going to look in the game. So I've played this a little bit here. We're in Kamoshida's palace just so we can take a look at the combat and running around. So here we are in a safe room. Let's go out and get into a battle. And you can see it's running pretty smoothly here with these graphic settings. So let's get into a fight. And as you can see, here in the battle, it's running pretty smoothly. So if you want to play some Persona 5, then you shouldn't have too much trouble as long as you don't want to turn the graphics up. We can run around. We can do the battles. The cutscenes are fine. So, one nice thing about this handheld is you can actually run Windows games. Now, as long as you don't mind running some of the lower impact games, you can do pretty well. So let's load up a different game. I'll spare you guys the loading screens. So we're going to take a look at Borderlands 2. I've gone ahead and loaded the game here, spared you guys all the loading screens and the waiting. But as you can see here, we start to play a little more heavy 3D games. Borderlands 2 is not actually that heavy, and I've got the graphics settings down here. But you can see we're getting about 24 frames per second. So I actually tried Borderlands 3. I have it installed on this computer, but you really don't want to play Borderlands 3 here unless you really like playing 15 frames per second. So, Borderlands 2, you can actually play. It reminds me a lot, actually, of playing Borderlands 2 on the Vita, except if you play on the Anbernic WIN600, you actually do get access to all of the DLC. So this isn't the best experience for Borderlands 2. The joysticks are not really ideal for Borderlands 2. But as you can see, the game is certainly playable, so at least as playable as it was on a system like the Vita or on a low-end PC back in the day. You can run around, get frame rates between 20 and sometimes a little over 30, as we see here. So certainly playable. Again, not ideal, but the Anbernic can certainly handle older 3D games like the Borderlands series. You notice a little bit of lagging here. So you can see a little bit of lagging, a little bit of stuttering, but playable, but not ideal. Particularly since the joysticks here are not really optimal for 3D games. These little switch sticks, they work, but they're not great. So we have Borderlands 2, we've done Persona 5, and let's take a look at one more PC game really quickly. And again, I will spare you guys the loading screens. So here is Tales of Symphonia, the Steam version here, so the Windows version. And if you look at this game, what you'll see is the game is limited to 30 frames per second anyway, and the Anbernic WIN600 can handle this older 30 frames per second title with no real problems. We'll just get into a battle here so you can kind of see what the frame rate looks like in battle. As you can see, doesn't really have any trouble here. So you won't have any problems with a lot of older titles. And let's actually look at least one game that's been emulated here. And again, I will spare you guys the loading screens. So here's a PlayStation 2 game. Those of you who are at least a little familiar with my channel probably knew which game I was going to pick. It's Star Ocean Till the End of Time, which is one of my favorite PlayStation 2 games. So let's take a look at Star Ocean on the WIN600. And I've got it loaded up. We're in the Royal City of Aryglyph. I like to demonstrate this area because sometimes emulators chug a bit on this snow that's falling. And with a little bit of emulator tweaking, changing hardware download mode, you can actually get this running pretty well. Got a little bit of I think I have a little bit of upscaling going. Oh, I've got native resolution here, probably for a little bit of speed. So still looks pretty good here. Let's get into a battle and see if we get decent frame rates. So here we are. Let's get one of these guys and get into a battle. You can actually upscale a little bit here on the WIN600 this game, as long as you don't mind a little bit of stuttering when you go in and out of battle. But it is pretty darn smooth. At least I have the European version here, which is running with no ill effects here on the WIN600. Now, I saw a little stuttering there, but that usually happens with going into battle. As you can see, it's running pretty smooth. But you're going to have difficulty running the difficult to run games on the WIN600. Champions of Norath is right out. I can't really get that game to run without lagging. So a lot of the difficult to emulate titles are going to be difficult on the WIN600 as well. A lot of times Windows machines do better than your Android handhelds at emulating PlayStation 2. But the problem really is that the WIN600 is kind of underpowered. So you don't have the power of something like a Steam Deck or the Ally or a similar handheld to that, or a laptop. You have a pretty low-end processor here, and you can do a good bit of PS2, but the more difficult to emulate games, you're going to have trouble emulating them here as well. But Star Ocean 3 runs pretty well, as you can see. So let's get out of this. Don't need to save here. I got plenty of save states for Star Ocean. So let's talk a bit about the handheld itself. Some thoughts, some good points, some bad points, and should you buy this? So, there are some good points about the WIN600. One, you can take off the back here, and the RAM and the SSD are easily accessible. They're right here under this cover. Just take out the screws, pop it open, and you can update the RAM. You can put more RAM in here, although honestly, more RAM's probably not going to do you a whole lot of good. The issue with this system is not how much memory it has. It's just the fact that it has a weak CPU. You can update the storage. A terabyte, though, is actually plenty for a handheld this size, so I don't feel the need to update it. But you can if you want. It's really easy to do. The handheld actually has 2 USB ports. You can see I've got the capture card plugged into a USB-C to HDMI output right here. There is another USB-A port here. You can plug in a USB drive. You can plug in an external hard drive. You can plug in a mouse and keyboard here, or a hub. So we're really very flexible here. And just to make this easier to hold on to, we're not doing any more game capturing, so I'm going to unplug here so you can see the USB-C, which doubles as your charging port, and USB-A. This is actually pretty thoughtful. A lot of the gaming handhelds don't actually have but one port, so I consider this a real plus. Also, notice the stacked shoulder buttons here. This is not something that Anbernic has usually done. This is one of their first handhelds, I think, that actually has them like this. Unfortunately, they're not analog triggers, but they work well enough for simple gaming. So L2 and R2 are just buttons here. You have your controls here. So the D-pad, the buttons, they feel pretty good. The analog sticks, well, they don't feel so good. And we've got a home button. We've got a Windows button over here, start and select. So you got a good selection of controls here. On the side, you can see, this is actually pretty darn thoughtful. On some of the other handhelds, you have to have a special button combination to get to a keyboard. But this little button right here on the side is a keyboard button. It will bring up the on-screen keyboard, which is very useful on a handheld like this. So props to Anbernic for including something like this. There is also a switch on the side. You can see right here. If you switch this down here, little picture of a controller, the controls on the front go into controller mode. If you're needing to use Windows, though, you can switch the switch upwards, and the joystick and buttons will act like a mouse, which again is pretty convenient. The other handhelds will do this too, but I like the idea of a switch. You don't have to mess with a software toggle or anything like that. You just flip the switch. You don't even have to check any settings or not to figure out what mode it's in. It's very convenient. Again, props to Anbernic for including that. That was actually a good, thoughtful idea. You've got your headphone jack on the bottom. Unfortunately, you also have your speakers on the bottom, so the sound is not the best while you're holding this. Rare and bottom firing speakers on these handhelds are pretty common, but that doesn't mean I have to like them. So on this side, we have volume and we have power. So, the handheld, I think except for the joysticks, is probably pretty well laid out. The joysticks really aren't that good for doing first-person games like Borderlands, but they'll work for more simple games. Again, not the best, but you've got your analog sticks, and at least you can use them. Now, so we've got some actually good things here, but of course, the bad points, the battery on this, and if you read up on the internet, you'll certainly find more information about this, but the battery on the WIN600 is not the best. And mine in particular, if I clicked the wrong button, wouldn't help. If I take a look at the battery, it's 74% right now, which I guess isn't bad. I've had it on for a while, but it won't charge up to 100%. It'll get to 99% and stick. And there are battery calibration issues with the WIN600. You can certainly look that up on the internet and find it out. It's not a complete deal breaker, but it's kind of disappointing if you get a new device and the battery won't charge all the way up. And replacements for the battery in the WIN600 are not necessarily easy to come by. Battery life is just okay. If you're just tooling around the Windows interface and playing some simple games, doing a little emulation, the battery will last a while. But if you start running Borderlands and Persona 5 and other more taxing games, then your battery life is going to be, for some of them could be an hour or two. So don't expect stellar battery life from the WIN600. But of course, most Windows handhelds have this problem. The Ally in particular, if you're running it at its maximum capacity, the battery drains really fast. So you have a lot of fun while it's running, but doesn't run for very long. So I guess I won't fault the battery life too much, but it isn't actually good. A Steam Deck OLED will certainly get you way better battery life than this. Now, the ergonomics here are okay for older games. Like I said, the analog sticks kind of make it painful to play first-person games just because of where they are. They're not in a convenient location. And you're going to have some trouble with those. For short sessions, it's fine, but I wouldn't want to play, assuming the battery could even handle it, I wouldn't want to play Borderlands on here for a couple hours. I think my hands would be crying out in pain if I did that. Another thing, screen quality. Screen quality, the fact that it's a 720p screen is not so bad. It's just that the screen is not that bright. I don't have it on full brightness right now because I'm trying to save the battery. But even turning it up, the screen is dimmer than a lot of the competition. So it's kind of a very middle-of-the-road grade screen here. I mean, it works, but this is not a handheld that you would ever point to and say, oh, wow, I love that screen. The Anbernic RG556, that's a great, bright screen. In fact, this handheld would be a lot better if it had the RG556's screen instead of the one it's got. So another thing that is not necessarily so great about the WIN600 is you'll notice we've looked all around this handheld. This is actually very unusual for Anbernic. We're looking all around this handheld here, and the thing we're missing is a micro SD slot. So while the handheld is easy to upgrade the SSD, relatively, you can get images and whatnot from Anbernic's website, if it works, to reflash your SSD if you need to, if you make an upgrade. But there's no micro SD slot. This is, I think, like one of the only Anbernic handhelds that doesn't have one. I wonder if they just forget, because it would make a lot of sense to have a micro SD slot for easy expansion without having to open up the handheld. So I don't know why they left this off. I seriously wonder. It's like, oh, we forgot to add a micro SD. Ship it anyway. But I will fault them for that. They had an easy expansion option. Yes, you can swap out the SSD, but it would be far easier to slap an SD card in here if you could. But they didn't add us a slot. Now, the other thing, you probably can't hear it on the video here, but right now the system's idle. It's not making that much noise. But when you've got a game going, this fan runs like crazy, and it's also quite loud for one of these little fans. It's louder than my Steam Deck when it's running full blast. It's louder than the Ally, and the Ally has two fans. So this is a really loud. It's actually kind of distracting if you're playing a game that requires a lot of the processor power, just because it gets to the point where it starts to drown out the speakers. So fan noise is certainly an issue here. Now, so when you look at this, I will admit I actually like this handheld. It has problems. Just because I like it doesn't necessarily I mean I recommend for you to buy it. But this handheld is kind of quirky. It's kind of neat looking. It's a little PC handheld that's the size of a Switch. In fact, I store mine in a Switch case. So I like it because of that. But as far as comparing this to the competition, this is $349 new. You can probably find them used a little cheaper. But the Ally Z1, the one that's not the extreme model, you can walk into Best Buy right now and buy one for $399. So it's really hard to justify buying this for $349 when you can go buy the Ally, which is way more powerful than this. Night and day difference in the kind of games it can play, the emulation performance, and everything. Screen quality, control quality. Really, it's like a different world. And it's $50 more. And you can walk into Best Buy and buy it. Now, true, the Ally that I'm talking about only has a 512 gig SSD, but it also has expandable micro SD storage. So I don't have to rip it open if I want to add a little bit more storage to it. But storage isn't everything. Power counts for a lot, and the Ally just basically beats this thing into the ground in terms of performance. So given that the Ally is $50 more, it's hard to justify buying this. And I haven't even mentioned the Steam Deck. You can buy. I don't want to do that. You can buy a Steam Deck. True, it's a 64 gig model, but you can buy the Steam Deck direct from Valve for $349, same price as this. And again, it's really hard to justify one of these, even though I think it's a neat little device, when you can get a Steam Deck for the same price. And of course, the Steam Deck, you can also put in a micro SD card. So yeah, it has 64 gigs of internal storage, but you pop in a micro SD card, you can save your Steam games there. Pop in a terabyte micro SD card and you're good to go. So I can't really recommend buying this, mainly because the competition now is just so much better. If they drop the price of this to $200, well, it might be a different value proposition. If you can get it used, then that would be, for less than $200, closer to the price of an Anbernic RG556, then it might be worth the buy. But for right now, the competition has just gone way beyond what this Anbernic handheld offers. And for essentially the same price, like I said, you can get that 64 gig deck direct from Valve. Same price as this. So, and the deck, even though it's the LCD deck, it's pretty much better than this handheld in every way. The screen is bigger, the controls are way better, and the processor is a lot faster. So even as much as I like this quirky little device, I think it has a lot of things that Anbernic actually did right here. I just can't recommend it. So if you're going to spend some money on an Anbernic handheld, I really think the best handheld Anbernic makes is the RG556. So if you want to give Anbernic some money, give them some money for a 556. But I would say pass on this unless you just want to play around with it because it's quirky and you can get it for way less than Anbernic wants for this on their website. Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to me ramble about the WIN600 and demonstrate a few of its capabilities, or maybe lack thereof. And I hope to see you in the next video.